Scary Town Stories.
Today, we're going to talk about a man by the name of Joran Van der Sloot. Born August 6, 1987, in the Netherlands, his family moved to Aruba when he was only 3. Growing up, he was a good athlete, playing soccer and tennis. He also seemed to be a bright student, making the honor roll consistently in high school. He was a normal teenager by all appearances. His mother does mention, however, a few red flags about Joran growing up. She said that he had the habit of sneaking out at night and also of telling lots and lots of lies. Joran and his 2 buddies, the Kalpo brothers, Deepak and Satish, kind of had the reputation around the island of being partiers and ladies' men. They would frequent the casinos and bars in the capital city of Aruba, Oranjestad. The boys were known for hooking up with tourists and would be seen with different girls regularly. Fast forward to the 30th of May, 2005. Natalee Holloway, an 18-year-old from Alabama, is on a final night of her 5-day vacation in Aruba. She is on a senior trip with over 100 other classmates, celebrating graduating from high school. She was planning on attending the University of Alabama in the fall on a full ride as a pre-med student. Natalie's classmates said that she was having a great time on the trip, and she was not shy about taking advantage of the legal drinking age being only 18. The night of the 30th, Natalie was seen on security footage talking to a man at a casino. Soon after this footage, Natalie and her friends left to go to a popular bar called Carlos and Charlie's. Natalie and her friends stayed at the bar for a few hours, and when it came time to leave, Natalie separated from her friends and is seen jumping into a car with 3 men. As the car drives by her friends, she yells out, "Aruba!" and the car drove off. Natalie's friends recognized one of the 3 men in the car as the guy she was talking to earlier that night in the casino. Her friends assumed she was getting a ride back to the hotel and just taking advantage of her last night on vacation. The next morning, the 7 chaperones are trying to round up all of the students to get to the airport and head home. Natalie is nowhere to be found. The chaperones get the hotel to open Natalie's room, and in the room, laying on the bed, was Natalie's opened and packed suitcase. Lying next to the suitcase was Natalie's passport. The chaperones immediately called Natalie's mother, Beth. Beth came to Aruba right away and started doing her own investigation work because the authorities wouldn't let her file a missing person report until 48 hours had passed. Beth went to the bar, Carlos and Charlie's, the last place Natalie's friends saw her. She convinced the manager to see the security footage, and she was able to see Natalie and a man interacting on camera. Beth then prints out the images from the security footage and takes the pictures back to the Holiday Inn Natalie was staying at. As Beth was showing the images around the hotel, one of the workers recognizes 3 of the men interacting with Natalie that night. They were even able to give Beth one of the men's addresses. Natalie's mother immediately takes this information to the Aruba police. The police then accompany Natalie's mother and stepfather to the address provided by the hotel worker. The address they were given was the home of a man by the name of Joran Van der Sloot. When they get to Joran's house, he denies knowing Natalie, but soon he realizes there's surveillance footage of him and Natalie, so he decides to change his story. Joran tells Beth that Natalie did leave the bar that night with him and his two friends, the Calpo brothers, but that they went to the beach to see sharks, and then they took her back to the Holiday Inn at about 2 a.m. But Joran does mention, as they drove off, he saw a security guard approach Natalie. The search was on for Natalie in Aruba. Eventually, 2 security guards are arrested in this case, due to the information provided to the police by Joran and the Calpo brothers. 8 days after their arrest, the security guards were released from jail because they had alibis. Since the police now know that Joran and the Calpo brothers lied to them, Joran, Deepak, and Satish were arrested for suspicion of involvement in Natalie's disappearance. This time, when Joran is arrested, he tells a different story of what happened to Natalie. He claims that Natalie left with the 3 men from the bar that night, but that the Calpo brothers dropped him and Natalie off at the Holiday Inn, and Natalie and Joran went to the beach for some romantic time. Joran then says that he and Natalie had sex on the beach, and he just left her alone on the beach afterwards. He claims he simply walked away from her and went home. He didn't know what happened to her after he left her on the beach. Since the Calpo brothers were given an alibi by Joran, the Aruban authorities released Deepak and Satish. Once the Calpo brothers were released from jail, though, Joran changes his story again. Joran now says he was dropped off at home first, and that the Calpo brothers took Natalie. The authorities really don't know what story to believe at this point, and when prosecutors bring the case in front of a judge, the judge claims there's not enough evidence to keep the Calpo brothers or Joran in jail for this crime. But since Joran had been changing his story and lying to the police, the judge orders Joran to stay in jail for 60 days as punishment. Before the 60 days was up, Aruba authorities had rearrested the Calpo brothers along with another man named Freddy Armbadas. During their investigation, police learned of a time Freddy, Joran, and the Calpo brothers sexually assaulted a young underage woman who was visiting Aruba. Police figured that if the men did it once, they could have done it to Natalie as well. However, just 10 days after police arrest the men, a judge decides once again there just isn't enough evidence to charge these individuals in Natalie's disappearance. The judge released all 4 men, including Joran Van der Sloot. Once Joran is released, he tries to capture the limelight, and he goes on somewhat of a media tour. During this tour, he gives a new rendition of what happened that night. This time, he says that Natalie was the one who tried to sleep with him, but he walked away from her on the beach and left her alone. After his short-lived fame, Joran decides to get away from Aruba, and he heads to Bangkok, Thailand. While in Thailand, he frequents the casinos and spends most of his days gambling. One day, Joran hits it big and ends up with enough money to open his own coffee shop. The coffee shop was open for a few months and seemed to be a success, but that didn't last long. Soon, Thailand authorities set up a sting operation and caught Joran on video drugging and kidnapping young Thai women and sending them to the Netherlands. Joran was supposedly getting paid $13,000 for every girl that he successfully trafficked. Just before the authorities gathered enough evidence, and right before they were about to arrest Joran, he suddenly closes up the coffee shop and heads back to the Netherlands. Back in the Netherlands, Joran starts taking college classes, but mostly spends his time gambling in the casinos. After a year in the Netherlands, Joran needs more money or attention, and he decides to release a book called Disappearance of Natalie Holloway, which translates to The Case of Natalee Holloway. Joran says that he made the book to make some money. He claims he knew the world was invested in the story, and I'm guessing probably needed some more gambling money. After the book was released, the authorities in Aruba raided Joran's residence. They confiscated his computer, which contained some messages telling his friends a sixth different version of the story. In these messages, he was telling his friends that Natalie was for sure dead and that he had taken Natalie's body out to sea and thrown it overboard. Authorities used this computer evidence to rearrest Joran and the Kalpoe brothers. Even though Joran wasn't in Aruba, he was extradited back to Aruba and arrested for manslaughter. When they brought the case before a judge, the judge said the police still do not have enough evidence to charge the suspects, and he ordered the release of the 3 men. The judge also goes on to say the police needed to leave the men alone and not mess with them again. 10 days later, the authorities in Aruba announced Natalie's case was closed. It wasn't solved, but they were not going to be searching for her anymore. Soon after, a Dutch TV reporter came forward and said that he had proof Joran had committed the crime. The reporter said he had video evidence of Joran admitting what happened to Natalie the night of the 30th. Within an hour of the reporter coming out with this information, the Aruban police reopened the case. Joran tries to get ahead of this story, and he claims that he was trying to impress a man whom he thought was a drug dealer. In this video taken by the reporter, Joran told the man that Natalie ended up overdosing on the beach, and as Natalie was shaking, he panicked. He called his friend, and his friend took her body out to sea and dumped her overboard. On November 24th, 2008, Joran then gives an interview with Fox News in which he gives his 8th different rendition of what happens to Natalie. This time, he claims he kidnapped Natalie and sold her. In the interview, he claims that she was still alive, but in a very bad situation in Venezuela. Right after the interview, Joran immediately retracts his claims to Fox and saying he made the entire story up and that he just wanted to get a paycheck. Then, 2 years later, on March 29th, 2010, Joran does the unspeakable. Joran calls Natalie's mother Beth and tells her that he will reveal where Natalie is if she gives him $250,000 and a $25,000 advance. Beth obviously gets the FBI involved, and the cops set up the exchange. They wire Joran $15,000 to the Netherlands, and then Beth sends him $10,000 in cash that Joran had to pick up physically. The cops videoed everything and watched to see what would happen. Once the money was wired, Joran gave Beth an address in Aruba and claimed that Natalie was buried in the foundation of the house. The cops knew right away he was lying because the home didn't exist in 2005 when the incident happened, but police still did their due diligence and checked it out anyway to make sure Natalie wasn't there. Then, on June 3rd, 2010, Alabama issued an arrest warrant for extortion and wire fraud for Joran. The next day, special agents from the FBI and Interpol served search warrants on 2 different residents in the Netherlands, believed to be where Joran was living, but they found nothing. Around the same time, police in Alabama were trying to find Joran, and 5 years to the date of Natalie's disappearance, May 30th, 2010, Stephanie Flores, a 21-year-old college student, was reported missing by her family in Peru. Stephanie was found dead 3 days later in a hotel room in Lima, Peru. The room she was in had been checked out by none other than Joran Van der Sloot. The day after they found Stephanie's body, Joran was apprehended by authorities in Chile. When he was arrested, he confessed to killing Stephanie. Joran said that he had met Stephanie in the casino just after she had won a $10,000 jackpot. The two went back to his room and got romantic. They then started playing around on Joran's computer. He claims he received a message that said something about Natalie's disappearance, and that Stephanie questioned him about it. This questioning ended up with Stephanie slapping Joran. Joran then said in that moment he lost control and strangled Stephanie and beat her with a tennis racket. When he was done, he took all her cash and jewelry and left. On his way out of the hotel, he stopped at the front desk and he said he had paid for the next few days and did not want anyone to disturb his room. While in Peru awaiting his trial, Aruba police flew down to talk to Joran about extorting Beth, Natalie's mother. Joran claimed he tried to extort Beth because, quote, he wanted to get back at her for making his life tough for the last 5 years. During the confession, Joran said he snapped on Stephanie because of all the pressure and stress Beth was putting on him. He basically claims it was Beth's fault for the murder of Stephanie Flores. Finally, on January 11, 2012, Joran was sentenced to 28 years in prison. He pled guilty and ended up in a Peruvian prison where he remains for the next 2 decades. Sadly, Natalee Holloway has still not been found. Though she has been declared dead, her family doesn't give up hope of finding her someday. Thank you for listening to Scary Town Stories. Until next time.